Welcome back to Revenge Plus, where revenge isn't just sweet, it's unforgettable. Let's dive into today's unforgettable story. I still remember the exact moment when I first discovered that everything I thought I knew about my marriage had been a lie. I was sitting in my car, waiting for the light to turn green when I received a text that shook me to my core. It was from an anonymous number, and the message was simple but devastating. Your ex-husband is hiding assets before the divorce is final. Don't trust him. My heart stopped. I couldn't breathe for a second, thinking, how could he do this? How could the man I once loved, the father of my children, betray me in such a cruel and underhanded way? I stared at the phone screen, trying to make sense of it. Was this a mistake, maybe a prank? But deep down, I knew better. I had always had a nagging feeling that something wasn't right, that there was more to this divorce than I was being told. I tried to brush it off, but the seed of doubt had been planted, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. I knew I had to do something, but I couldn't figure out what. I wasn't the type of person to let something like this slide. But what could I do? How could I prove that he was hiding assets? I had no proof, no leads. I couldn't just confront him. If he was really hiding something, it could make everything worse, not to mention I didn't even know where to start. I felt lost, desperate, and betrayed. But I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't going to let him get away with it. No way. He thought he could outsmart me, that he could steal everything from me and leave me with nothing. But what he didn't realize was that I had a secret weapon. I wasn't going to let him destroy me. Then, something unexpected happened. A few days after receiving that text, I was talking to a friend of mine who worked in law enforcement, and she mentioned something that caught my attention. She casually said, "You know, there are private investigators who specialize in cases like this. They can dig up things you wouldn't believe." My heart raced. This was the break I needed. I didn't waste another second. I immediately started researching private investigators. I wanted someone with experience in asset recovery, someone who could find the truth, no matter how deep my ex-husband had buried it. I couldn't do it alone. I needed an expert. After a few phone calls and interviews, I hired the best in the business. I didn't care about the cost. I was determined to get what was rightfully mine. I needed to know everything, every bank account, every hidden property, every penny he thought he had gotten away with. The investigator promised me he would get to work immediately. I remember the night I finally met with him, feeling both nervous and excited. As he sat across from me, he leaned in and said, "I've seen cases like this before. Trust me, we'll find what he's hiding." Those words gave me a glimmer of hope, but they also filled me with a sense of dread. What if the truth was even worse than I imagined? I knew I was about to go down a dangerous path, one that could unravel everything I had ever known. But I also knew I had no choice. If I didn't take action now, he would get away with it, and I would be left to pick up the pieces of my life with nothing. As I sat there, listening to the investigator lay out his plan, I couldn't help but wonder, just how deep had my ex-husband's lies gone? And how far was I willing to go to make sure he paid for what he had done? The next few weeks were a blur. There were phone calls, meetings, and constant updates from the investigator. Every time my phone rang, my heart skipped a beat. I was in constant suspense, waiting for the next piece of the puzzle to fall into place. But then, one day, I got a call that would change everything. The investigator had found something big. My hands shook as I picked up the phone. "We've got something," he said. "You're not going to believe this, but we've traced a series of transactions that lead to an offshore account. It's his, all right, and it's a lot more than we expected." The air left my lungs. My ex-husband had been hiding assets in an offshore account. How long had this been going on? What else was he hiding? In that moment, everything became crystal clear. This wasn't just about money. This was about control. This was about power. And I was about to take it all back. I didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning. As I stood there, holding the phone in my hand, I could feel the anger building up inside me. It wasn't just about the money. No, it was more than that. This was about everything he had taken from me. The years of love, trust, and loyalty I had invested, only to have them thrown away for greed and deceit. He had made me believe that everything was fine, that he was the man I thought he was. But now, everything was coming to light, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. He was no longer the person I once knew. He was the enemy now. As I began to piece together the information the investigator had uncovered, my mind raced through all the moments in our marriage where I should have seen the signs. I should have known. But I hadn't. And now here I was, standing on the precipice of a battle I never wanted, but one I was now fully committed to. Let me take you back a little. When we first met, he seemed perfect, charming, ambitious, and caring. Everyone around me loved him, and I believed he loved me just as much. For years, he was the man I thought I could trust with everything, my heart, my future, my children. But as I would come to learn, appearances are often deceiving. There were moments that should have raised red flags, but I brushed them off. The little things, the unexplained trips for business, the strange absences, the odd comments about money. But what really stands out now was how he always managed to act like the hero in every situation, the one who always had control, the one who always made the decisions. At the time, I thought it was just part of his personality, someone who knew what he wanted and went after it. I never questioned it. But now, looking back, it was all a game where I was the pawn and he was the one pulling the strings. He had this way of making me feel secure, making me believe that I was part of his world, that we were a team. But as the investigation unfolded, I realized how wrong I had been. His actions weren't those of a loving partner. They were the actions of a master manipulator. There were 3 things that really stuck out to me. First, his refusal to be transparent about money matters. Whenever I asked him about our finances or made suggestions on budgeting, he would brush me off with a smile and a comment like, "I've got it under control, don't worry." But what he really meant was, "You don't need to know." The second thing that now seemed glaringly obvious was his obsession with maintaining control. Everything had to be done his way, his career, our home, our future plans. He was always the one to make the decisions, and I always followed, thinking it was just what a supportive wife should do. But now I saw it for what it truly was: manipulation. He wanted to keep me in the dark, to keep me dependent on him so I wouldn't question his moves. And then, of course, there was the third, his coldness. The way he started pulling away emotionally, the long hours at work, the constant excuses for why he couldn't be there when I needed him. I never saw the affair coming, but in hindsight, the signs were all there. He had checked out long before I realized it. As the investigator delved deeper into his financial dealings, the story that began to unfold was far more sinister than I had imagined. My ex-husband had been funneling money into secret accounts for years, hiding assets from both me and the court. He had set up a complex network of offshore accounts, shell companies, and properties in different names. It was a web of lies and deceit, carefully crafted to shield his wealth from the divorce settlement. The more I learned, the angrier I became. He thought he could hide behind his lies, that he could play the system and come out on top. But what he didn't count on was me. What he didn't count on was the fact that I wasn't going to let him get away with it. He had underestimated me, and that was going to cost him. I began to understand the depths of his treachery. This wasn't just about money, it was about power. It was about making sure I had nothing left when this was over, so I couldn't rebuild my life without him. He had used me, manipulated me, and now he was trying to take everything from me. But he didn't know who he was dealing with. I wanted to make him pay, not just for the betrayal of our marriage, but for the betrayal of trust, the betrayal of everything he had promised. He thought he was smart, that he could get away with it. But I was smarter. I had one thing he didn't: determination. I knew that the path ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be moments when I'd want to give up, when the weight of it all would feel like too much to bear. But I wouldn't. Not after everything he had taken from me. I could feel the plan taking shape in my mind, like a jigsaw puzzle falling into place. There was so much to do, so many moving parts, but I was ready. The investigation was only the first step. Now it was time to fight back, and fight back I would. I wasn't going to let him win, not now, not ever. But as I sat there, pondering the next move, I couldn't help but wonder. How far would I have to go to make sure he paid for what he had done? How much was I willing to risk? And then, a chilling thought crossed my mind. What if this plan, this pursuit of justice, was going to cost me more than I ever imagined? It had been weeks since I first discovered the depth of his deceit, and every day felt like a battle. The anger, the betrayal, it was all consuming. But amid the whirlwind of emotions and revelations, one thought kept pushing me forward. I had to take control. I wasn't just fighting for my share of the assets. I was fighting to regain my dignity, my self-respect, and the future I had envisioned before he ruined everything. But how? How was I going to outsmart him, expose his lies, and make him pay for what he had done? I had hired the best private investigator I could find, but I still felt like I was standing in the dark, waiting for the answers to come to light. It wasn't enough to just know that he was hiding assets. I needed to make sure I had irrefutable proof and, more importantly, a plan to bring him down. That's when it hit me. I wasn't going to play by the rules he thought I would. I wasn't going to follow the conventional path of a victim, waiting for the court system to deliver justice. I had to do things my way, play the game like he had done. I had to outsmart him at every turn. The first step was to dive deeper into his business dealings, his financial records, everything that seemed like a lead, no matter how small. I had already uncovered traces of offshore accounts and hidden properties, but I needed more than just the information. I needed to catch him red-handed. I needed to make sure that when the time came, he wouldn't be able to deny it. I began working closely with the investigator, going over every detail, every scrap of evidence. It was tedious work, but it was the only way. I wasn't going to leave any stone unturned. The more I learned, the more disgusted I became with him. The truth was even worse than I had imagined. The man I had trusted for years had been living a double life, hiding money, manipulating everything around him to ensure he would be the one to come out on top. But what I didn't expect was the revelation that came from an unlikely source, one of his closest colleagues at work. It wasn't much at first, just a casual conversation over coffee that seemed harmless. But as I listened, a bombshell dropped that changed everything. She had been involved in some of the transactions with him. She knew about the offshore accounts. And she didn't just know about them, she had helped him hide the assets. My stomach turned. I felt betrayed all over again, but this time I had something. I had someone who could provide the missing pieces. She had the inside knowledge I needed, the key to unlocking everything. We arranged a meeting in secret. I didn't trust anyone, especially not him, but I knew that this was my chance to turn the tables. She agreed to meet, but only under one condition, that I keep her involvement a secret. She had her own reasons for wanting to stay out of the spotlight, but she assured me that she would help me expose him. The meeting took place in a quiet cafe, a place where no one would recognize us. When she walked in, she looked nervous, glancing around as if expecting someone to appear out of nowhere. I didn't blame her. If my ex-husband knew what she was about to do, he would stop at nothing to ruin her. We sat down and she wasted no time getting to the point. She pulled out a folder from her bag, and as she slid it across the table to me, I felt my heart skip a beat. Inside was the final piece of the puzzle, the proof I needed to expose him. Documents detailing transactions, emails, and even passwords to accounts he thought no one knew about. It was all there. The veil was lifting, and I could see the full extent of his betrayal. She explained how he had carefully moved money through various shell companies and bank accounts, making sure that everything was hidden in plain sight. No one would be able to trace the flow of cash unless they knew exactly where to look. But she had given me the key. She had given me the access to destroy him. The feeling of triumph surged through me, but it was quickly replaced by a new, more dangerous emotion. Fear. I had the evidence, but now I had to use it. I had to be careful. If he caught wind of what I was doing, I could lose everything, not just the assets, but my reputation, my peace of mind, and my safety. I had no choice but to proceed carefully. I couldn't let him know I was onto him. I had to keep him in the dark while I set my plan into motion. And that's when I realized just how much I had underestimated him. He had been playing the long game for years, but now it was my turn. I began to prepare for the next stage of my plan, one that would catch him completely off guard. The legal route was important, yes, but I knew it wouldn't be enough to truly hurt him. I needed to expose him in a way that no one would forget. I wanted the world to know what he had done, to see him for the fraud he truly was. At the same time, I had to keep the pressure on him in every way possible. The investigator and I worked tirelessly to gather more evidence, building the case bit by bit. We followed every lead, tracked down every clue. Every moment felt like a race against time, and I could feel the tension mounting as the day of reckoning drew nearer. I knew that once I had everything in place, I would have the power to destroy him. But what surprised me most of all was the satisfaction that came with it. It wasn't just about revenge, it was about reclaiming my life, my independence, and my dignity. For the first time in years, I felt like I was finally in control. But even as I prepared to bring everything to light, I couldn't shake the question that lingered in the back of my mind. What kind of person had he become to do something so ruthless, so cruel? Had I ever truly known him at all, or had he been hiding behind a mask the entire time? The days that followed were a blur of planning, strategizing, and executing. The more I uncovered about his hidden world of offshore accounts and shady deals, the more my resolve solidified. He had made his moves in the shadows, but now I was the one controlling the game. He had thought he could outsmart me, manipulate me into walking away with nothing, but I was about to show him just how wrong he was. It was strange, the feeling of power that had slowly crept over me. For so long, I had felt small, trapped in a marriage that was built on lies and deceit. I had let him control everything from the finances to my own self-worth. But now, as I sat at my desk late at night, piecing together the final steps of my plan, I realized that I had transformed into someone unrecognizable. Someone who was no longer afraid. Someone who was finally ready to take back what was hers. The key to all of this was going to be timing. I had to wait for the perfect moment to strike. I couldn't afford to rush things or make a mistake. Every move had to be calculated, every detail precise. I couldn't let him see me coming. The first part of my plan was to catch him off guard with something he never expected: a simple email. It was an innocuous message at first glance, just an update on the divorce proceedings. But within it, I had embedded a subtle trap. I had included a series of questions about the financial details he had previously been avoiding. His response, or rather his lack of response, would tell me everything I needed to know. If he was truly hiding something, he would be forced to cover his tracks, to deflect. And that would be my opening. I sat at my computer, hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the anticipation of what was to come. The email was short, to the point, and asked questions that seemed completely normal. The kind of questions he should have answered long ago. And yet, as I hit send, I knew that this was the beginning of the end for him. The calm before the storm. Days passed and I waited. I was anxious, yes, but the calm I had felt earlier began to ebb away, replaced by a growing sense of confidence. Every second felt like it was stretching into eternity, but I knew I couldn't let my guard down. I couldn't allow myself to get too comfortable. And then it came, the response I had been waiting for. At first, it was exactly what I had expected. He denied everything, played the victim, and tried to deflect the blame onto me. But the more I read, the more I realized that he was starting to crack. He was scrambling, trying to cover his tracks, but he couldn't hide the panic in his words. It was subtle, but it was there. I could see that he was beginning to panic. That was when I knew the time had come. I was ready to make my move. I had one last meeting with the investigator. It wasn't just to go over the evidence again, it was to prepare for the final confrontation. I wanted to make sure that I had everything in place, every detail accounted for. We went over the documentation again, the emails, the financial records. It was airtight. There was no way he could escape this. If that revenge hit just right, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more epic comebacks and justice-served stories. Drop a comment below. I'd love to know what you would have done in their place. The investigator looked at me with a sense of respect, but there was also something else in his eyes: caution. "You're about to do something big," he said quietly. "Once you pull the trigger, there's no going back. Are you sure you're ready for this?" I nodded. I've been ready for this for a long time. The night before I planned to reveal everything, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned in bed, my mind racing through every possible outcome. Was I making the right choice? What if things went wrong? But deep down, I knew I had to follow through. For me, for my future. The morning arrived and I stood in front of the mirror, staring at the reflection of someone who had been transformed by pain, by betrayal, and by the need for justice. I barely recognized the person looking back at me. The woman who had been hurt, humiliated, and left in the dark was no longer there. In her place was someone stronger, more determined. Someone who had nothing left to lose. I grabbed the folder containing all the evidence. The emails, the transaction records, the secret offshore accounts, and the hidden properties, everything was in there. This was the moment I had been waiting for. I walked out of the door, my heart pounding in my chest. I was about to bring down the man who had tried to destroy me, the man who had thought he could get away with everything. He had underestimated me. And that was his biggest mistake. When I arrived at the courthouse, I could feel the weight of the moment settling over me. The air was thick with tension, and I knew that everyone in that room would be watching me. But I wasn't afraid. I had prepared for this. This was my time, my moment to take control. I walked up to the judge's desk, my hands steady despite the storm of emotions swirling inside me. I handed over the folder, watching as the judge scanned through the documents. The look on his face changed as he flipped through the pages. His eyes narrowed, and I knew that he was seeing what I had seen, the truth that my ex-husband had tried so hard to keep hidden. I stood there silent as the judge began to ask questions. He was thorough, deliberate, and there was no mistaking the gravity of the situation. My ex-husband's lawyer, who had been so confident just days earlier, was now on the defensive, trying to discredit the evidence, but it was useless. There was no denying the truth now, and as the judge looked up, his expression stern, I knew that the tables had officially turned. My ex-husband, the man who had thought he could control everything, was now the one who was powerless. He had played his hand, and now he was paying the price. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. I could almost feel the weight of the consequences settling on him, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. He had done this to himself. He had given me no choice but to fight back, and now he was going to pay for it. The judge's voice broke the silence. "This court will take this matter under advisement," he said, his tone firm. "But it is clear that these actions cannot go unpunished." And that was it, I had done it. The man who had stolen from me, manipulated me, and destroyed my trust had finally been exposed. The justice I had been fighting for was within reach. And as I walked out of that courtroom, I couldn't help but smile. I had won, and he had lost. The relief I felt after the court's decision was brief. The legal battles were far from over, and my ex-husband, as expected, wasn't going down without a fight. He hired a powerful attorney, someone known for bending the rules and pulling every trick to get out of tight spots. But this time, things were different. The truth was on my side, and I wasn't backing down. For weeks, the case dragged on. Every legal motion felt like an eternity. The weight of the constant stress threatened to consume me, but I couldn't give up. I had come too far, the stakes were too high. Then, a breakthrough came, a court-ordered audit of his finances. The new evidence it uncovered was staggering. My ex-husband had been hiding even more assets than we had discovered, funneling money into shell companies and offshore accounts. The extent of his lies was beyond what I could have imagined. The audit report confirmed it all. I could hardly believe the numbers. He had been meticulously hiding money for years, thinking he could get away with it. But now it was all out in the open. With this new evidence, my lawyer filed an amended petition, and the tension in the room shifted. My ex-husband, once confident and smug, now looked cornered. His lawyer set up a meeting, and when we sat across from each other, the desperation was clear. "We're prepared to offer a settlement," he said, trying to sound calm. "We'll give you a fair share if you drop the case." But I wasn't interested in a quick resolution. I wanted more, I wanted full justice, and I wasn't going to back down now. "No deal," I replied firmly. "I want everything you've hidden, and I want you to pay for what you've done." The silence was heavy. He could no longer bluff or manipulate his way out of this. The consequences of his actions were finally catching up to him. The legal turning point had come, and he had lost. The days following the court meeting felt like a slow burn, the tension rising as I waited for the inevitable fallout. My ex-husband's confidence had all but evaporated, replaced by desperation. For the first time in this entire process, I could feel his grip slipping. He had tried every trick in the book to manipulate the situation, but now, with the evidence stacked against him, he was losing everything. It started with his finances. The audit had revealed more than I had anticipated: hidden accounts, fake companies, assets siphoned away to protect his wealth from the divorce settlement. The numbers were staggering, and there was no way to deny it. His financial empire, built on lies, was starting to crumble. The court had given him a chance to respond, to explain himself, but his lawyer's defenses only grew weaker with each passing day. The more they tried to push back, the clearer it became that he had no escape. Every attempt to discredit the evidence fell apart under scrutiny. The truth was unavoidable, and he had no choice but to face it. The first blow came when the court froze his accounts. His once carefully constructed fortress of money and power was now under investigation, and his assets were no longer his to control. The realization must have hit him like a ton of bricks. The man who had once walked through life with a sense of invincibility was now facing the very consequences of his deceit. But it didn't stop there. His reputation, which he had so carefully curated, began to unravel. Colleagues, friends, and business partners who had once admired him started distancing themselves. The whispers began, and before long his name was associated with fraud, dishonesty, and betrayal. His network of support was crumbling, and he was left alone to face the fallout of his actions. Then came the final blow, the emotional collapse. The weight of the lies he had told, the people he had hurt, and the years of deception took its toll. I saw it in his eyes when I stood in front of him at the final court hearing. He was no longer the man I once knew. He was broken, defeated, a shell of the arrogant, untouchable person he had been. In the end, the court awarded me everything I had asked for. The hidden assets, the compensation for the years of betrayal, everything. My ex-husband had lost it all. His wealth, his reputation, and his sense of self-worth were shattered beyond repair. And as he stood there, the man who had thought he could destroy me was now the one left with nothing. The collapse was complete. The court case had ended, but the consequences of everything that had transpired were far from over. As I sat in my apartment, looking at the final settlement documents, I couldn't help but reflect on how much I had been changed by this journey. What started as a mission for revenge, for justice, had evolved into something greater, something more meaningful. The truth had not only set me free, but it had also shaped a new version of myself. A version that was stronger, more resilient, and more determined than ever before. But the victory didn't come without its costs. I had spent so much time focused on my ex-husband, on the betrayal, on the need to make him pay, that I had neglected other parts of my life. My children had felt the tension, the long hours of meetings, the emotional strain I had gone through. They were my motivation, but they had also been part of the collateral damage. It was time to heal, not just for me, but for them too. As I began to rebuild, I realized that there was so much more to life than the scars of the past. I had fought so hard for justice that I had forgotten the importance of forgiveness, not for him but for myself. I couldn't change the past, but I could shape my future. I could choose to let go of the anger and bitterness that had consumed me for so long. I could find peace, and in doing so, I could give my children a better life. A life not defined by the chaos my ex-husband had created, but by the strength we found in moving forward. Through all of this, I found that healing wasn't linear. There were days when the anger would resurface, when the memories would come flooding back. But I had learned how to manage it, how to let it pass, and how to focus on the future instead of being shackled by the past. I found strength in unexpected places, in the people who supported me, in the women I helped, and in the love I gave to my children. They had seen me at my lowest, but now they were seeing me rise. It was a process, but it was happening. I was finally moving forward, truly moving on. And as I watched my children, their laughter filling the air, I knew that they were the real victory. They were the ones who had been there through it all, the ones who had helped me stay strong when I felt like falling apart. Now I could give them the life they deserved, a life filled with love, joy, and the security that comes from knowing the truth always prevails. In the end, my ex-husband had thought he could control me, break me, and leave me with nothing. But what he didn't know was that his betrayal would lead to something greater. It led to my transformation, to my strength, and to a future that was all my own. And that, in the end, was the true victory. The ripple effect of that victory spread far beyond the courtroom. It spread to everyone whose lives I touched, to the women I helped, and to my children who had witnessed a mother who never gave up. I had taken back what was mine, and in doing so, I had learned that no matter how dark the storm, the sun will always rise again.